Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee. Welcome on Zoom, Councillor Abbott. We have an apology from Councillor Kett. Would somebody like to move that's accepted? Councillor Lewis, Councillor Soper, I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Report from the Invercargill Youth Council. Oh, sorry, before we get to that, my apologies. Public forum, we've got South Alive who've come along to present to us on their achievements over the past while. Courtney, Beryl and Paul, welcome along. We might just need to grab another chair to... Thanks, Courtney. Thank you.
Ready to go.
Please, Beryl, thanks. Yes.
Yeah. Kia ora koutou. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. Just introducing, as you said, Paul Saranka on my left and Courtney Ellison and myself, Beryl Wilcox. We're representing today South Alive and the work we do. We just wanted to give you, the committee, an update of the community-led development projects and achievements and priority focus areas that since we met with you last year. It's a year ago, and we wanted to keep you updated and keep telling the stories. We continue to keep on telling our stories to reflect the vibrant, diverse community that takes a lead in its own future to achieve our combined mission statement, as you can see up there. Our urban regeneration group covers the whole of the 9812 area of South Invercargill that has now well over 18,000 residents and growing housing developments. There's been a really deliberate strategy to widen opportunities across this area, as there can be at times the misconception that we're limited to South City only. So we've worked hard to actually divert out across the whole area. In our organisation, we've actually got 14 trust board members, all who are volunteers with a wide range of skills and expertise. We have 3 operational staff, as well as the pantry manager and their employees. We've got over 100 always regular volunteers at any one time, but there's thousands of community contributions and hours, in-kind donations, along with really strong support from businesses, organisations, the schools and community members who celebrate the social transformation which is evident. And this year we've been really proud to be celebrating 10 years of South Alive. Our success is reflected by both the social transformation of increased pride, well-being and safety, along with the physical gains that have been made, including from the beginning, the South City upgrade, the zero rubbish program that's still successfully running, community art with murals and sculpture, the Russell Square improvements that is happening at the moment, as well as advocacy for improved housing and sections.
As Beryl said, this year we're celebrating 10 years, and as part of this, Beryl and some of our volunteers put together a little video commemorating and reflecting back on what's been achieved in those 10 years. So I don't know if it'll work, but this is just a small snippet of a longer video, just 30 seconds or so, from some of the key people that have been part of South Alive's story.
People saw the changes and had faith or confidence that we could actually produce the goods.
It's been wonderful seeing the community realise they can have a voice. The goal with the South City shopping area was total transformation, nothing less. But we started by picking up rubbish. We're just people who are willing to get stuck in and do something and make it work.
And good to see the way, over 10 years, you would recognise the place and they're totally different.
as I said, that's just a small snippet of a longer video. So there's about a 4-minute video. If you want to check out our website or our YouTube page, you can watch the whole thing. But that is just a few snippets of people telling the story of the transformation that has happened and how it all really started. Let me switch now. Oh, there we go. So just to give a wee update of some of the things that have been happening since we last came and spoke with you. At the Pantry, our social enterprise, there's been a few things happening. Even with all the challenges of COVID, we've been able to keep our village markets going over the summer months. We've set up a recycle station. That's really important and comes through strong as sustainability from the feedback we get from our volunteers in our community. So this recycle station has been set up. It collects milk bottle tops, bread tags, can tabs, and they all get turned into various products and support different causes. Also, as part of managing COVID, we had to put a wall between our cafe and store part of the pantry. And while that wasn't great to have to put a wall up, but what actually presented an opportunity to bring some art into the space. So Southland Art Society had various artists that came along and displayed their artwork that was available for people to purchase, but also just brightened up the space and what could have otherwise been, not such a nice thing to have to put a wall through the middle of the space. Aside from the pantry, there's been lots of other things happening. Some pictures up there show a clean-up day that we held. This was something that was really common in the first sort of early years of South Alive, and it was nice to sort of come back to doing some of those working bees cleaning up the streets. So that was done in the South City area, but we're looking to do that quarterly and to do it in different parts of South Invercargill that the community identify could do with a bit of a clean-up. There's some of our youth events, the 3x3 basketball, our World Kindness Day, which has become an annual event now on our calendar, and there's some cookies there that the Fernworth primary students made. So we have lots of people contributing to these events. It's not just us running it. We had Fernworth primary providing cookies, Aurora College students made soup, various businesses and individuals came together to put on things that were free for our community that day. And there you'll see some of our Pay It Forward work. So we've got a Pay It Forward volunteer team. There's a team of knitters who knit all those woolen goods that are given to the hospital, and those are the Christmas hampers that were given to families that needed them. So that's part of our Pay It Forward food boxes. Am I pressing the wrong button now? There we go. Oh, there's a few pictures that have dropped off. But so a few more things. We've just updated our website with some more functionality so people can sign up to volunteer with us online. They can book our community rooms online. They can donate to us online. And we've also set up a platform in the background for our volunteers to sign in and be able to connect with each other, for us to track the volunteer hours a bit better, so we can see just the magnitude of effort that's going into all the work that our volunteers do. We've also unveiled the first panel on our heritage trail that we're developing across South Invercargill, and so you can see there the panel at the War Memorial in South Invercargill. That was the first one that is unveiled, and what will be 8 or 9 panels throughout South Invercargill, and make a nice sort of 1-hour walking loop for families to walk around. We've had to adapt quite a bit, obviously, with COVID and running some of our events differently. We'd usually have a really big Children's Day and Trolley Derby at Elizabeth Park and down Remu Street. That couldn't happen this year, but we didn't want to cancel completely, so we just adapted how we ran it, and some of the activities we would have had at the park we put into little activity packs, which you can see a picture of there, and we handed those out on Children's Day in March, so families could do those activities together. And there's another example with the story walk that we've got along one of our new fences in our community park, and so we've partnered with the Invercargill Library to do that. So you walk along the fence line and you can see the panels. Each panel is a different spread of a children's book, and you can read the story as you walk along. We've actually just replaced it with a Matariki story for our upcoming Matariki event. We've had concerts for youth that we partnered with Public House South on. We've done some upgrades to the fence. We've got a new community mural that gives a bit of a sign letting people know that we've got a community garden there, so that's a new mural on our shed. And that's one of our school holiday activities there too, some raranga, some weaving that we did. So that's just a little bit, that's just a snapshot really of what's happened in the last 12 months. And then looking forward, some of our future priorities, these are things that are identified by our community that are important to them and that there's a really strong emphasis on having more opportunities for our young people. And so we have been doing a little bit of work in that space, and with some support through the ICC Wellbeing Fund and the Te Manawa Fund, we're running a lot more events in the school holidays and some youth gaming and that kind of thing. But building on that, we've recently obtained some funding from the Vodafone Foundation to support some trialling of some initiatives for rangatahi. So we've got some sort of key themes around the trials that we'll be running around improving access. So that's transport, physical access, and also digital access. Developing a bit of a tech club and developing some tech skills, providing the opportunity to showcase the talents of youth in our area, and connecting with employment opportunities. So, for example, through our social enterprise, providing some work experience opportunities. And so this week we'll be putting out an advert to recruit for a youth coordinator to deliver these trials. And so their role will involve engaging with the young people in our community to shape what these trials look like, delivering them and learning from that and seeing what we could carry on with. One of the other priorities and things we're getting underway shortly is a review of the facilities that are available in South Invercargill. Obviously we've got a great space where we are, and there's a lot of other great spaces across the South Invercargill area, but they're not always known about or known where they are, how they can be used. So we're just doing a bit of a review of that and meeting with the different organisations in these facilities to understand what is available, connecting with different organisations that might not have their own facility and seeing what their needs are and looking to the future around what might be needed. And this will be really useful information for us, but also for, I imagine, many others, so we'll be happy to share that information. And that will help us to hold more events and activities in local areas and utilise existing facilities across our area. One thing we know and we hear a lot is that transport is a real barrier, so if we can hold things more in the local places, even within the South Invercargill area, that can be really helpful for getting people engaged in things. I'll hand over to Paul.
Thank you. It was a rather hard act to follow. So look, we spent quite a bit of time on consultation, talking with our community and listening to them. And these core items that are on this board at the moment are the things that keep coming back to us from our community that they wish us to improve on and to continue with. So we adapt those slightly as regards to how they're delivered and where they're delivered. So along with that, people wanted more high quality, enjoyable events. Now, it's quite difficult with COVID, but we've managed to do that so far. They also want to feel safe in our community, and that's a sense of security wherever they are. And one of the things that, not that long ago, our community constable was transferred, and there was actually quite a gap in there. And we got a lot of feedback about that. They were happy to say that we have a new community constable, but that sense of having that backing and that community involvement, someone that they could approach and deal with things before they got out of hand and have that quiet word, was quite important to our people. We're looking at continuing our beautification program, which is really around our streetscapes and how we can provide extra pride and that people feel in the community, a sense of ownership, and along with that, of course, comes the ability to change the direction, I suppose, of what's been going on in the past. Our rubbish, I suggest to you, is far lower than it's ever been, and that's an indication that people in the community are saying, hey, pick that up, look after that, you own it, don't leave it. All right. So when we're talking about the youth, we're providing, as Courtney's just said, some extra activities, and we're targeting that group, we're focusing on that a little more. There are a lot of activities with regards to youth taking place. It seems that there's lots of organisations involved, but this one's from the bottom up, not from the top down. Our housing group's morphed a little bit as there's been improvements made in certain areas of it, and commend the team from council who's looking after those sections and that are in disrepair and rather unsightly and out of order. But we're talking more about sustainability and about how that can happen in your own place, how you can look after yourself in times of need and times of want. Yeah, adjusting to COVID again, and I think there'll be another again after that. So after a lot of work, we managed to keep our doors open for all of our community. Now, it wasn't a small feat, so we managed to set up a situation where we could have groups of vaccinated people who are using our public rooms and hireage, and on different occasions people who weren't vaccinated could also meet in those areas. They're separate, not at the same time, but obviously there's a lot of work around our staff and our people and making sure that the cleanliness and all those protocols were in place. It's a small facility. Well, it's not that small, but that allowed us to have that bespoke sort of operation taking place. So you would have seen that there were pictures of our pay it forward boxes, and we delivered some extra isolation packs to those in need as well. I think that's vitally important. Looking at what's going on in the community at the moment, I think there'll be a greater need before long. So it's about how we, as a community, address those needs as well. With the introduction of vaccine passes, we have a lot of people who don't have the ability to print, download, and our team set up what they thought was going to be a couple of hours where people could come in and they could assist them and laminate passes and everything. It turned into a day and a bit. A flat stick with just a continuing stream of people needing assistance in that regard. And you'll see that adapting how we run our events, and that's about having smaller, more bespoke events which are actually in the areas, so that instead of everybody having to travel, we're looking at how we can put them into pockets in our community of interest, and that's why we're going through that, looking at those facilities. There's been lots of facility, I suppose you look at it, surveys done, but actually this is about what the owners or occupiers or the controllers of those buildings have available, what they'll let use their facilities, because it is theirs, and how we can work together and collaborate so that we can get better use for them, so the buildings are utilised more, and also we can get into our own areas rather than people travelling across town. We'll be running on our website. We have in the background, we have an intranet for our volunteers and that to relate to each other, continue those connections. I think we're getting to a stage where we've got more people isolated at the moment. While there's restrictions removed, we've got groups who have become conditioned to not communicating with others and to being more self-reliant, or yeah, that's probably the best word. All right. So we do, with the pantry, which is our social enterprise, so we've got 25% of our people in our community, roughly, have a disability, wherever you go in New Zealand. So the pantry is a disability confident employer. It operates the same regards with volunteers, provides opportunities, socialisation, a whole lot more than just selling goods. And I think what's shown in the last year is that these spaces are needed, and this connection is vitally important. We have a group of core, there's a few older members there, who this is their meeting point, this is their social connection. So it's far more than what we'd normally have. We're also looking at what we're doing with we've got a newsletter going out, and that'll actually be a drop, a letterbox drop, to everyone in the zone as well, because not everybody can be connected as we normally see. Over to Beryl.
Just as an extra, we found out yesterday that we won the Top Shop Award for the pantry, so we're thrilled about that. It gave us some marketing, what would you call it? Marketing package, which was fantastic. So just coming to the end now, we continue to be a voice for South Invercargill and wider strategic engagement and discussions, and we found of late that there's a lot of discussion happening, including with the Just Transition, Strong Communities, Murahiku, the work stream that's obviously being led by ICC, the Murahiku Regeneration Worker Transition work stream, and then of course there's the Southern Regional Skills Leadership Group. Our approach is very much to share our knowledge and learnings about community-led development and the key principles which underpin these actions. We also actively collaborate and consult to achieve better outcomes. Examples of these commitments include working with mana whenua, schools, civil defence, FENS, Public Health South, Active Southland, the Southland Interagency Forum, Vodafone Foundation, Department of Internal Affairs and more. It's really important to collaborate, to avoid duplication and to work to get the best possible outcomes. So our whakatauki there is a reflection of many hands make light work, and while there might be only 3 of us here presenting today, everything we discuss is a reflection of the hard work of hundreds of people that come together to build a stronger South Invercargill community. And we popped in some of the events that are coming up in this coming month. This Saturday, our midwinter Christmas party, Matariki event. We have Meet the Funders, and I believe that ICC and different ones are coming, so people can go and talk to funders and craft swap. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou, and thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Beryl, Paul and Courtney. I'd normally open it up for questions, but we've gone well over time. Yeah. Certainly we value the fact you've taken that opportunity year on to come along and keep us updated. We value your mahi as well, and thank you for the good work that you're obviously continuing to do through what's been a trying year. But yeah, congratulations on that success, and look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillors, that brings us to this time the report from the Invercargill Youth Council, Katiana and Nazia. Welcome along.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Nazia Tuka Inua. I'm from the Invercargill Youth Council, and I'm just here today to give a little update on the Youth Council and what we've been up to. So last month on Saturday, 14th of May, our Youth Week Committee collaborated with UN Youth NZ, and we hosted a Youth Hui event. We had a good amount of participation, probably less than we anticipated, but I do notice it was like a really short notice, and also COVID played along during that time as well. And the event was hosted by UN Youth, ran by Will, who came down from Auckland. We started the day with a public speaking impromptu just to break the ice a little bit, and then we got to the main conversation of the day, which was we talked about education mainly, and just talked about the problems that a lot of us experience regarding education in Invercargill especially, and a lot of them, a big part of it was about poor heating issues at school and just teaching quality at school and just learning environment overall at school. And it was just, I thought it was very interesting to see how everyone had like different problems and just different opinions regarding those. And overall, I thought it was a really great event. It was very well planned. So I thought the Youth Week Committee did really well planning it. And also noticed Councillor Soper came along that day as well. So I hope it was enjoyable. And yeah, that was from me.
Kia ora, ko Katiana toku ingoa. I'm also from the Invercargill Youth Council. And recently, the Youth Council, we've been planning and deciding. As a Youth Council, we have decided to all collaborate on hosting a candidates forum for the upcoming election. And we are hoping to host this event at the Repertory Theatre, and also we will be live streaming it so that people from home or don't want to go to a big event with COVID can also access it. We're aiming this event towards youth, although we won't turn away anyone that wants to attend. Basically, it'll be a Q&A session type of structure, but at the start there will be a topic question that the candidates will have 1 to 2 minutes to sort of as an introduction. That topic question will be based around youth and youth policy as well. Yes, along with having it online live stream, we'll also be having an online question interface. So from the audience or from home, you can send in questions and they'll be asked. And so you can, if you're just not confident enough to ask them yourself, if you're in the audience or if you're from home, so you can hear the answers to your questions from the candidates. Yeah. We've thought about elements like food, and basically the food is so that it's sort of like a cause for people to come along, because a lot of people aren't really gonna spend 2 hours of a Wednesday evening to come along to said boring event. But we're hoping to get many people to come, and almost aiming it towards people that wouldn't normally come, and aiming it towards seniors in high school. So we will be doing advertisement through schools and online, trying to aim it towards that kind of area and those people. Yeah, we're still defining this event and look forward to seeing those who are running for candidacy to come and be a part of it. But other than that, anything else that we have planned or are futurely planning will be on our Facebook page and Instagram page. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Katiana. And Nazia, Councillor Soper, you were at the Youth Declaration. Howie, do you want to provide a quick bit of feedback on how it went? The second or third year in a row you've been along to it?
Yes, I did go. I didn't go to the whole day because I don't want to interfere too much in your discussions. But the time I was there, I would like to say I was very impressed with the breadth and the in-depth discussion that was taking place, and the honesty and openness that was taking place around the table. I know there was a little bit of disappointment that there was a bit of a lesser turnout, but there were reasons for that, and the numbers who were there were certainly having very intense discussions, which I thought boded very well, can I say, not only for the organisation of the day, but for the future of what our young people are contributing and will continue to contribute to the community. Because I thought if you all had that level of discussion, and some of you were new to the council at that stage, that it was looking very good for the rest of the time on the council and for your future participation in civics and civil society. So thank you for letting me come along.
Thank you, and thanks for extending the invitation out to councillors as well. Councillors, we have the Youth Council report. If there are any other questions. Councillor Crackett, did you want to move?
I would like to move very delightfully. I'm really very much looking forward to the candidate evening.
Second that.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that the report's received. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against. That's a compulsory gin in the clubhouse. Well done, Steve. Thank you very much for taking the time to escape from school early and come along in this summery afternoon to present. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, that brings us along to the Roaring Forties consultation. Rather than going into the staff report, first of all, I thought it would be appropriate that we start with the submissions to be heard. And we have 2 of those. Noel, thank you. We are running 10 minutes behind time. Thank you for persevering with us. Welcome along via Zoom.
Kia ora, everybody, and Chair, thank you for the invitation to speak. I do hope the afternoon sees you all well, and I would report that the sun is shining in Bluff, so all was good. What I wanted to say was that the Roaring Forties entity, I actually think it's a very good and important move, and that on the face of it, it seems it's going to be protecting the interests of the ratepayers, which I guess is a very important thing. So I would say that I support the proposal, which I think that you would welcome that. But I wanted to just add a few comments that came to mind. the whole aspect of council financial entities, I think it needs to be able to come under better public scrutiny, and to boost the ratepayer confidence, a more transparent and educational drive to help understanding these financial entities, how they fit together, I think would actually be a good thing for council to consider. And when doing that, consider that there's also people that don't have good, efficient internet and computers. And I just make the point that I've got a reasonably good computer system, and I'm quite computer literate, but I did actually find it a little challenging actually finding the information that was about the Roaring Forties entity. And then when I did find it, it had a flowchart diagram that I couldn't really actually make sense of. So I got in touch with one of your council officers, and he was particularly helpful. He explained to me how it all fitted together, but actually pointed out that the flowchart actually wasn't quite correct. So, you know, I was probably right in giving him a call. So I just wanted to put that there for you, and I'll leave it there. Any questions, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Noel. It's open to questions now from councillors. Noel, there are none, which means that you get to enjoy that wonderful bluff sunshine. It's shining here in Invercargill as well. It's just obscured temporarily
Lovely to hear. Thank you very much.
by some nasty clouds. Thanks, Noel. Rodney, welcome along if you'd like to come and take a seat. Mr. Trubb's submission is on page 11.
Get this off. Working?
Yes.
Kia ora koutou. Everyone knows me around here. Obviously, my submission was pretty much that I couldn't agree with the proposal. One of the reasons for that is I don't think there was enough information in there for me, anyone else, to actually try and get a grasp of what's the issue, what are the risks, what are the advantages and disadvantages. So obviously pulled the original consultation document out that came out, and I looked at it and went, who drafted this? Because we had a company in there as HWCP Roaring Forties, which clearly was a typo. We had, I think it was, what's still in there? Electricity Southland, which changed its name in December last year. So I look at that and go, when you consult on something, you get simple things like that wrong. So started doing a bit more digging, couldn't find the report the council had requested. That it was finally put up on the website on the 20th, where the report said it would actually be maybe released with the consultation document. Technically you should release it with it, but then went through it and had a read, and just came up with a heap of different queries, questions, and wondered how we got to the stage of looking at risks. So I looked at it and started going through, and when I look at the consultation document, it said that EIL is a strategic asset, providing core electricity infrastructure lines to Invercargill. EIL owns the lines used to supply electricity. Goes on further to say strategic purpose of EIL is electricity provision to Invercargill. Now I don't doubt that, but it's a bit more than that. Council governance statement says that EIL is to operate a successful electricity distribution business, but also invest in the infrastructure, electrical and energy sectors. ICHL statement of intent says that EIL is exploring ways in which it can diversify its income away from the lines due to the regulatory risk associated with this. Moving those assets away increases that risk, and I see nothing in here about how they're going to manage or mitigate that. EIL's own statement of intent is to manage, grow, and if appropriate, realise subsidiary joint venture and associated investments in the infrastructure, electrical and energy sectors. So when I read in a document that that's not its core business, and yet when I read in the key documents that it is its core business, I go, when did its core business change? I also queried, because the consultation document talked about energy companies. The report you got talked about electricity businesses. They are different. So I posed the question, well, if they're energy companies, you have to consult on that. I got told, no. We're not talking about energy companies, we're talking about electricity businesses. Electricity businesses themselves aren't exempt. Body corporates that operate in electricity business are. Trusts that were set up for that are. Otherwise, they're not. So, like Noel, I did a bit of a digging to find where the shares in this Roaring Forties Energy Limited Partnership were, knowing that a limited partnership doesn't have shares. There's a shareholder in those companies that does. But further to that, I tried to work out what are the risks. In that original paper, there was the inherent risk of the investment isn't changed. The inherent risk might not be, but other risks could be. The risk to the investment in RFELP is reduced. It's noted to the extent that RFELP may pose a risk to ICHL. This may impact the ability of ICHL to support EIL. Now, ICHL provide the financing and the treasury support. So if that impacts that, what impact does that have on EIL's dividend back to ICHL and ICHL's dividend back to ICC? I pose that question, I just got told that revenue doesn't change. Revenue might not, but the risk certainly does. But I also read in there that SGLP was established in early 2015, and this was part of a package of agreed changes following the acquisition of OtagoNet. There's a number of people around this table that are well aware of the uncalled capital consultation in the early years, and that consultation was to purchase shares in OtagoNet, $9.5 million worth, which was subsequently purchased, sold, and then the investment in SGLP, which actually created quite a bit of a stink around this table, and I think some legal opinions. So they weren't actually agreed at the time, and they weren't part of it. But I get through here and it talks about EIL's ability to actually be resilient in terms of an earthquake or other natural disaster will be enhanced. I struggle to see that. EIL again gets funding from ICHL. How its ability to react and be resilient, I struggle. It ensures its substations, but not its lines or its cables. I go even further into that and it starts talking about a passive investment, and therefore it should be held by the holding company. Well, that was never agreed at the time. But then I look at it and go, but OtagoNet joint venture is a passive investment. They own less in OtagoNet than they do in Southern Generation. OtagoNet doesn't supply lines or electricity to Invercargill. Neither does SGLP. The risk of a OtagoNet joint venture would be higher than this because they also don't insure their lines or their cables. So I look at this and I go, what are we trying to fix? If it's a simple case of there's no oversight or vision into Roaring Forties, change the SOI of EIL. You can do it under the Act, change it, make them report. And if you then want to get rid of it, get EIL to shift it instead of paying $100,000 to a consultant. The other one is the formation of a CCO. Now, I think your report today still doesn't tell you whether it needs to be one. I believe the OAG have said it does. But does that align with your partners in terms of their reporting? If not, how do you create a CCO that has a balance sheet date of 30 June? Your partners don't have that date. Like, I just look at it and go, there's not enough information. There's not enough, how would I put it, rigour around the information provided. I just find it weak. And on that basis, I can't support it. That's me.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. Look, Rodney, you talked about the, I guess the, I'm going to use quality of the consultation document in the sense of providing the information that you would seek to make a decision. Now, you alluded to our previous consultation for electricity, and that was back, I actually remember it very well, in October 2014, where it was found by our legal representatives in the room that council hadn't consulted adequately, and we went back to square one and reconsulted. Do you think it's deserving of that degree of severity to start again and consult?
Well, the information that's there, unless you guys have a lot more information, and if you do, I'd be very disappointed, because you should supply information with a consultation document. But I can't see what the risks are, what the risk mitigations are, what the transfer, what that risk might be to ICHL, its dividends, its ability for funding. Like, if I look back over the last 4 years, I've seen subsidiaries fail to keep the share register. It's a breach of the Companies Act. I've seen the holding company not quite comply with its constitution in getting council to approve things. If we talk about, and I do believe that there was 3 years post that consultation it took to get a report from KPMG on that initial investment, which highlighted some serious sort of risks. This is slightly different, but I don't believe that there's anywhere near the information in here as what there should be. But again, I look at it and go, we had uncalled capital for certain things. That's now been changed when you move to LGFA. When you consulted on the uncalled capital, 10 million of that was a buffer for the bank. That buffer's now gone, it's 10 million. You had $16.7 million in a ICHL of redeemable preference shares, which you could have got interest on at any time. Technically, it was a loan when ICHL was set up in 1996. You've turned those into straight equity. You've already given them 26 million bucks without consulting. Well, I'm just looking at what I've seen over the last 3 to 4 years. It's a mess. Tidying things up, granted, but when I read a report like this that can't even get company names right, can't distinguish between energy companies, or puts energy companies in a consultation document, then talks about electricity businesses in a report, I'm just staggered, to be honest. I would have kicked it to touch.
Thanks. Yep.
Thank you. Further questions? There are none. Thank you for your submission, Rodney. We appreciate it, and for making the drive up to present this afternoon. Rhiannon and Andrew. Rhiannon, if you want to provide an overview of the proposition, and with Andrew, and perhaps Andrew, there are some questions around the ICHL perspective that have been raised that you might like to address as well. Thanks, Rhiannon.
So, kia ora, councillors. I'll take the report as read. The consultation took place over the period outlined. I will note that there was an incorrect draft that was initially loaded into the agenda, but that correction was made as soon as it was drawn to our attention. The information provided within the document was aligned with the risk profile that had been identified by ICHL, which I know Andrew will speak to in a moment. Consultation was promoted through a number of sources. We did receive 3 submissions, 2 of which you have heard today. On the balance of the issues raised, the recommendation within the report is that you proceed with the original recommendation from ICHL. So, Andrew, do you want to speak to that recommendation?
I'm happy to talk to it. And look, I thank the submitters for the submissions that they made, because they'll raise legitimate points. And I think starting with the Lakeland issue, I suppose that really highlights one of the issues that we're trying to address here. Short of, well, that is a subsidiary of EIL. EIL changed its name, didn't inform us. We should have looked, but it's an indication of the fact that things occur below EIL that the holding company really doesn't have any transparency over, or as a result yourselves. And so it's those sort of minor things that come through that highlight some of the issues that we're trying to address. And I think the other key point of distinction, and it's noted, the comments around what is in the EIL statement of intent and what is in the holding company statement of intent. But it's that subtle distinction that council and the holding company have been working through around what we call strategic investments versus commercial investments. And a lot of the things that EIL have expanded into and are referred to by Mr. Tribe in the statement of intent are what we've defined or agreed to define as commercial investments. And so we're reviewing them and trying to manage them in a different way. So the key strategic investment for the holding company and council in EIL remains the lime business. And whilst EIL might in its statement of intent say that it's considering and looking at developing other opportunities outside that strategic investment, they've been reviewed in a very different light to what they were previously. And in actual fact, to be honest, we're looking at taking that out of their statement of intent this time round. So that's a matter of ongoing discussion between the holding company and EIL. In terms of the decision that council's really been asked to consider, I think that the risks are really to be assessed at a group level. And again, accepting Mr. Tribe's comments, and they're right, and they're matters that were drawn out in the report. But at a group level, there's no change in the level of debt. The asset transfers and the group dividend and etc. will remain the same, because it's really an accounting exercise in terms of the ownership. The business otherwise continues on as it was previously. There is the live question of whether or not it's a CCO, and that is why council consulted, and again that issue was identified in the paper. We raised again because ultimately we will be guided by Audit New Zealand. We have a view, but we'll be guided by Audit New Zealand on their opinion as to whether or not it's a CCO, because that drives a lot of the consequences that Mr. Tribe raised with you. We checked back with Audit New Zealand again yesterday. They still haven't formed a view, so the issue is actually not that clear. And we appreciate the consequences and the angst that will provide our relevant partners if it does become a CCO. Realistically, from our perspective, if it's a CCO, we're comfortable. We operate in a CCO environment. It doesn't matter, but there may be some consequences, as Mr. Tribe pointed out, in terms of the accounting. It's an accounting exercise that we'll have to go through if that occurs. But ultimately, we're waiting on Audit New Zealand to form a view on that. So I think from a group perspective, the issues are identified and the issues are known. Happy if there's any further questions or if I need further clarification on them, but I think the paper stands for itself.
Thank you. Councillor Soper.
Andrew, when is Audit New Zealand likely to form their opinion, please?
I wish I could answer that question. They've had the issue. We raised it with them before we started this process, because obviously we know that this will be an issue for Audit New Zealand. One, the whole transaction, but two, whether or not it's a CCO or not. They're probably, to be fair to them, do have some time up their sleeve in that the transaction's unlikely to occur this financial year, so it won't have any implications until next financial year, but I would expect them to have an answer. Well, I would have expected one by now, to be fair, but I would expect one in the next month at the longest.
Sorry, next month.
Well, to be fair to them, I mean, they're asking lawyers for advice. I'm being generous and saying they've had a month. Another month probably should see them through. But I can't speak for Audit New Zealand, to be honest. But I would like to think that's a reasonable time frame.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew, is around the so the actual governance of the Roaring Forties investments, is that so the ICHL will have a the directors on ICL will have a say?
So currently, with the agreement of EIL, we have, and through yourselves, ultimately the appointment of the directors down into the Roaring Forties at this stage, but it's more the direct relationship with that director, and the oversight will be directly to the holding company rather than through Pylon, then EIL, and then up to ourselves.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Further questions? Okay, councillors, that brings us to the recommendations. Recommendation 3 is kind of mute at this point, having already heard from our 2 submitters. I'll take 1 and 2 first of all before we launch into any discussion around the final recommendation. 1 is that we receive the report, consultation, hearings and deliberations, and receive the submissions. I'll move. This is seconded. Councillor Skelt. Open for comment. There is none. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. And looking for a mover around the final recommendation. Councillor Skelt, you're moving it? Thank you. Is there a seconder? I'll second it to get it on the table. It's open for discussion. So I guess some of the consultation was clunky to start off with, and probably not an example of us at our best. But ultimately, I guess why I'm happy to second the recommendation is that it does bring a more direct level of accountability to ICC through ICHL, as opposed to ICC through Pylon or Electricity in Invercargill. And that's got to be advantageous. Councillor Crackett.
Would it not be advantageous for us to let it lie on the table until we have that answer?
The answer
With the
from
CCO?
audit?
Yeah.
Andrew, Rhiannon, do you have an opinion around that? The reason, while you think of an answer, I think Andrew's being generous in his estimation of a month, because I seem to recall we're still waiting on close off on last year's audit.
I suppose, and we flagged that there's no time issue realistically from our perspective, from the holding, and we flagged that in the initial report. My question would really be why, because from councils and the holding company's perspective, we operate as a CCO, and we have this discussion all the time with commercial operators who don't want to operate in the CCO space. Why? Extra transparency. We have to report to council. They have this risk that commercial information will be shared. We don't have that concern, and to be fair to councillors, I wouldn't expect you to have that concern. So that would be my real question. Why is the CCO question important to you? Do you want it to be or not to be a CCO? And why would you have a preference one way or the other?
Preference would be that it was a CCO so that it did have greater transparency.
And audit will form a view on that one way or the other, but you'll get hopefully the greater transparency through the holding company reporting to you.
That too.
And I guess there's a degree of the fears around commercial sensitivity. It's going to Holdco. It's not coming straight to council. So there's a level of protection around that.
And on that point, we, as has been raised with me numerous times, I mean, Christchurch Airport is a CCO. I mean, they do things that their council doesn't know about. You know, I mean, do you want that to occur? The short answer is no, but it's really it's a false argument to say being a CCO is a bad thing from your perspective. The partners might have different views, but you're the one making the decision.
Rhiannon.
There is one relevant factor of timing. The benefit of making this decision now means that it can be reflected within the annual plan documentation. Now, while this isn't an absolute requirement, it will mean that we're addressing some of the issues raised by Mr. Tribe today in terms of being able to provide a really clear organisational structure that is updated from the long-term plan to reflect this change if it is made. So that's just something to consider around timing that would need to be made today if it was going to be reflected within the annual plan documentation.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Thank you, Chair. Andrew, so that's the obvious end game is to get EIL back to being a Lgnz company and doing its stuff well. So AutogoNet, is that next to get the shares of that?
Noting that we're in public, there are different alignments between the two investments. So to be fair to everyone, AutogoNet as a Lgnz business is more aligned with the skill base that we would have sitting around the EIL board than the skill base we would have sitting around the holding company board. So if we were to keep AutogoNet, there is some sense that the EIL board has the skills and knowledge to be able to manage that most effectively. It's a balancing between those sort of, it is clearly not a core strategic investment, it's a commercial investment. There needs to be some work done around the nature of that investment and whether or not it meets the commercial criteria the council would like. But in terms of the ability to best manage that investment, it might be that the skill for that sits at the EIL board table.
Thank you.
Further questions or comment? If not, we have a motion on the table. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. It brings us to the minutes of the Community Wellbeing Fund. Councillor Lewis.
I'd like to move those be a true and accurate record of the meeting that we held. And on the side, I'd like to thank Councillor Ludlow for standing in at short notice to make the quorum on that particular meeting.
Welcome. If you can pull the mic in next time.
I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions, comments? If there are none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Minutes of the Extraordinary Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee meeting from May 10. Somebody would like to move there, true and correct. Councillor Emerson, Councillor Scout. Matters rising. I'll put that then. All in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Minutes of the Performance Policy and Partnerships Committee meeting regular on May 10. Somebody want to move?
Second
Councillor Abbott and
second that.
And Councillor Soper. Matters rising. Put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. And the minutes of the extraordinary meeting from May 24th. Moved by Reverend Cook, seconded by Councillor Emerson. Comments? Put the motion then. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, the Keeping of Animals, Poultry and Bees bylaw. Rhiannon and Gillian, welcome along. Or welcome back, Rhiannon. Welcome along, Gillian.
So, I'll take the report as read. We're bringing this bylaw to you for recommendation for adoption for consultation, noting the feedback from the District Court, which has been incorporated within the proposed changes. There are a number of other small administrative changes that are recommended, and we recommend that this be consulted on at the same time as the dog control bylaw that we'll discuss in a future paper that has benefits for ensuring that we have a wide ability to publicise this alongside those, so those consultations can work together. So Gillian just has a few comments around the specifics of the process of review that we have been through.
This was mainly an internal review, leading on from the comments from the District Court. We've incorporated those into the bylaw to ensure that we have the ability to order the removal of all livestock if required. We've also incorporated a hearing panel option within this bylaw, so for people to appeal a decision. There are a number of other, mainly small tweaks that have come through, just a more grammar, etc. And as part of this process, we also had a consultation with the national member from the RSPCA, who's responsible for consulting with councils throughout the country on the keeping of animal bylaws.
Thank you. Councillors, there are 3 recommendations. Can I ask, first of all, what's the difference between the process here and the other bylaw, 2 meetings ago, that we didn't feel the need to go out and consult on? Why? Is there a different threshold? Trudy or Rihanna?
Rihanna. Sorry, which bylaw are you referring to?
I think that was actually the
Was
noise
the
control
noise
policy.
control policy?
Yes.
Yes, so the difference is largely a matter of status. Consultation is required on bylaws under the Local Government Act and utilising the special consultative procedure, and hence the recommended process.
Thank you. Bylaw versus policy. Questions? Councillor Soper.
It's not a question. I'm happy to move the 3 recommendations.
Thank you. Is
Mr.
there a
Chair.
seconder? Councillor Skelton. Any other questions or comments councillors like to raise? Bearing in mind that it's going out for consultation, so it's really questions around process and what's in there. If there are none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And just stay where you are. I'll jump over the next item. We'll go straight on to the dog control policy and dog control bylaw.
So again, this policy, it was due for review. That has prompted the internal review which we've undertaken. As part of that, we undertook pre-engagement with a number of interested stakeholders and individuals, which was a very useful process and helped identify some areas for improvement within the bylaw. Hence, we are recommending both the policy and the bylaw to be adopted for consultation. The most significant element within the bylaw that is being considered is the definition around menacing dogs. So that's to bring it into line with the definition within the Dog Control Act. That essentially means that there will just be a difference in how the menacing and dangerous dogs are dealt with. So Gillian may wish to just say more on that in a moment. There are a number of other factors that are just able to be fixed as part of this review, which are linked to Rahui and some other elements within the specifics of language within the bylaw and the policy. As part of the pre-engagement, there were some other suggestions which can be considered in the future, but no changes are recommended at this time, and that's around elements for off-leash exercising areas. At the present time, the recommendation is that we've got the appropriate level of resources within the community, but that could be considered by council as part of a future planning process. Gillian, there may be other points you would just like to cover.
In terms of the changes we've made to menacing dogs, as per the Dog Control Act, we can counsel classify a menacing dog by deed when a dog has not been classified as dangerous, but council considers it may pose a threat to any person, stock, poultry, domestic animal or protected wildlife because of an observed or reported behaviour of the dog. So as such, the menacing classification is at a lower level than the dangerous classification. The approach recommended allows the animal control team flexibility in what requirements it will place on the owner when classifying a dog as menacing. We've also recommended an introduction of a process to allow an owner to apply to council for the menacing classification to be removed. The owner would need to be able to show evidence that they have not received any infringements in the preceding 12 months, that they've complied with any obligations imposed on them at the time that the dog was classified as menacing, and would otherwise have met the criteria to be classified as a responsible owner. The removal of this classification would always be at council's discretion. This came about as we had looked at what other councils were doing, and this is something that some other councils have introduced already and other councils are considering.
So just a question of clarification. Is there a need for somebody seeking the removal of that menacing classification after a period of time to come before a committee, or is it a decision made at a staff level?
I would think it's made at a staff level, sorry, yes.
It is.
Yes.
Thanks. Again, currently we have people who might object to a dangerous classification or a menacing classification, and they can come and go through a hearings process, but that's not what we're looking at here. It's about a natural reduction after a period of time.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Councillors, we have 4 recommendations there. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you. I'd like to move that we all 4 to be taken at once, and we make a positive recommendation.
Second that, Mr. Chair.
Moved and seconded. Open for comment.
If I may, it was a very robust meeting on the 25th of May, and some of these minor changes are coming out of that meeting, and I thank the people that took the time after hours to come to that meeting, staff and members of the public. It was a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. There's no further comments. I'll put the 4 resolutions. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. We all drop back to tab 13 now, which is the Media Tower Seismic and Deferred Maintenance. A request from the Invercargill City Council Charitable Trust. Richard, welcome along.
Just take the report as read, just for a bit of clarity. This is, we wear different hats in different parts of our organisations. This isn't a report around the work that we're doing, the cost or anything around that. It is simply saying the trust is asking for council to spend some money on what is a trust asset and giving them permission to act upon that as well. So just 2 things: giving council permission to work on the ICCT asset, and requesting council to spend the money that it's already decided upon. So that, again, that's not the debate for today.
It's a formality. Thank you. Councillors, there are 4 recommendations, which I'm happy to move. If there's a seconder. Councillor Arnold, thank you. Oh, yeah, Councillor Arnold, as a member, as a trustee from ICCT, it might be better that somebody else seconds the motion. Thank you. Is there a seconder?
I will.
Reverend Cook, thank you for that. With that clarity, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thanks, Richard.
Cool. Thank you.
The residents survey report, Rhiannon and Anna. Oh, Michael.
Could we perhaps take the council representation?
Right, if you drop down to... Oh no, she's back. We'll get a revolving door for you yet, Rhiannon.
Musical chairs, apologies. So we're pleased to include the residents survey for Council's information today. The report covers the process by which the survey was undertaken as well as the results. I'll just draw your attention to a couple of things. The first is the change in methodology, which should be considered when considering the results. So previously the residents survey has been undertaken once every 3 years as part of the long-term planning process and has been done via the phone. Now it's part of a national trend that there is less use of landlines, so at some point the change was going to need to be made to methodology. So we have made that change, like most councils now, to a mixed method approach. So this means that for this survey it was primarily an online driven approach with support from paper copies, phone and street surveying in order to build the appropriate sample. So the important thing to take away from this is that when you have an online approach, you're getting a response from those who are interested and respond to the postcard that was sent to every household, and then the sample is weighted to make up the appropriate population mix. This means that there is a slant towards perhaps people who have negative feedback that they may wish to make online. So that's just one thing to consider in the results. It does mean that it's more difficult to track back and compare with previous surveys, but from this point that methodology will mean that we can compare the results going forward more effectively. It also means that we're able to survey more often, at least once a year, and we are working with the provider now around options for continuous surveying, which would mean you'd be able to receive more regular updates on the satisfaction elements of the surveying on a quarterly basis as part of the quarterly performance report. So in this survey we were undertaking a number of things. The first thing was the levels of service surveying, which was part of the long-term planning process, and that's around asking people, is council doing the appropriate things that you want them to do? Are they doing it to the right level? And do you feel that there's an appropriate amount that you're paying for those services? The second thing we were doing was, for the first time, asking specifically about people's satisfaction across those new KPIs that were introduced as part of the last long-term plan, as well as then providing an opportunity for libraries and parks, particularly this time, to ask some more detailed questions that they were looking for as part of their strategic planning. The final element that was new was around those KPIs that were discussed in risk and assurance this morning around the working together elements. So those KPIs were set ahead of the surveying being done, and when we discussed with the survey provider around those questions, they just flagged, of course, that when you ask a question like, what do people think about is council or is council not a high performing council, you're going to get a certain response, so that should just be considered. But we still will be able to track that trend over time. So hopefully that's just a little bit of background that gives you an understanding on how the survey was done, how to interpret the results. I will just also flag that we have been having conversations with other councils around their processes, and there does appear to be a national trend at the moment. Perhaps it's linked to COVID, perhaps it's linked to other elements at the moment of lower satisfaction levels with the democratic process itself, which might be different to the satisfaction levels with the services that council provides. So sorry for that rather lengthy overview, but hopefully it just helps with the context of reading the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Rhiannon. I guess the context is useful because it is a different way that the survey's been carried out this time, and across, as you say, a different breadth of subjects being canvassed. It is, of course, reassuring to see that still sitting at the top are our parks and open spaces, as they have been for some time since Noah was last gathering animals. Councillors, there are two recommendations that the report is received, and we note the survey. Somebody like to move? Councillor Scout, Councillor Amundsen. It's open for comment or questions. Reverend Cook.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Rhiannon, if we're going to do this on a regular basis, quarterly sounds terrifying. Sorry. Will there be a process which restricts the weighting of the online part to no greater than it was this time, or something along those lines? Because I'm quite aware that it could actually become the dominating and obscure people's, the less agitated people's natural voices, so to speak. So the average person on the street or the average person that uses the services may actually be overwhelmed by the disaffected who are keyboard warriors. And I really think it's important that we think about this in advance and look at, do we restrict it? Do we weight it? What do we do to give everyday people their voice too?
Through you, Chair. Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. The survey providers are experienced market research company, and they are already weighting some of those elements within, and they have weighted for population, and they will continue to weight, and they are making those assessments and judgments as they see the varying samples over time. If we do move to continuous surveying, that doesn't mean that we will be pushing out and asking 800 people every quarter to respond. What it means is that there's a smaller sample that builds over the year in a cumulative kind of way, which means by the time you get to the end of the year, you've got the whole sample, but it gives you a sense of, as you go along, what people are thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? If there are none, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. The adoption of fees and charges schedule, which is our next item. Just before we, oh no, actually, sorry, Rhiannon, I'll let you open.
So the fees and charges schedule was consulted on alongside the annual plan, and you heard from submitters on this issue as part of the annual plan hearings. Providing the fees and charges schedule now for adoption, I will just note one change to recommendation 3, and that is just to note that there are fees within the dog control area that are impoundage fees, and due to the technical process will not be adopted until this report minutes is received by council on the 28th of June. This doesn't have a substantive effect because the fees and charges don't come in until the 1st of July. It's just a process element that it's important to recognise at this time. So the report notes the feedback that was had on the fees and charges, and it does note a number of administrative elements that were picked up between the time of consultation and now where the schedule is being brought to you for adoption, and those changes that are recommended to be made as a result of that. So happy to take any questions on the report, although sorry, I will just speak, if that's okay, to recommendation 4, just to note that we recommend that those changes not be implemented until the time of the Coopers Creek discussions being concluded.
Thank you for that. Can I start, Trudy, perhaps with you? Last night, councillors received an email from Mr. Tribe querying some of the charges around dog registration. Do you have a response to the points that were being raised?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. So just to remind councillors, it can be challenging to compare Southland District Council's area to ICC's area, given the urban versus rural environment. There are less call-outs for dog barking complaints and less call on staff for pick-up of animals, in most cases anecdotally, because the majority of dogs in the Southland District Council district are working dogs compared to pets. There's also, we have
additional costs that we look after. So we have an animal care facility that Southland District Council rents space only as and when they need it, but we fund that facility. We need to clean that facility daily. We need to feed those animals and exercise them daily when we do have those impounded, and that does have an implication. The costs for our after hours service have increased over the last 12 months as well, and we have not increased our fee over the last 3 years for dog registrations, yet we're seeing an impact from inflationary pressure even in this financial year. The team in finance had already scheduled, we're reviewing across council our fee charges and how we set those going forward. We have a revenue and finance policy that we adhere to where there is user pays. And our animal control, it is challenging when we do charge the majority of dog owners, yet we still have to pick up chickens, goats, sheep, horses, and cows, which those are not funded as such. And we'll also be making sure, looking into further, Patricia has mentioned to Mr. Tribe, we are digging further into those results that she had sent through.
So the current split, I think, is 93%?
Yes, 93% user charges, 7% is public good.
So at this stage, there's not a lot that we can do about that. That's a formal review process that we've got to go through, but I'd strongly suggest that council does that, because my personal opinion is it's an unfair burden on dog owners to shoulder. But the increase that's being signalled, you've said, comes after 3 years of not having had an increase. But has there been cost escalation that the department's had to meet?
We're already seeing it in this year, yes.
What about the increase in the level of service that's being required, so the type of calls we're receiving?
So we also have noted that we're seeing members of the community being more agitated. So we, for safety purposes, send 2 staff 2 calls, which has been really valuable, especially when they're involved in incidents that do escalate and we may need to involve the police. So for safety, when we get a call to pick up a wandering dog, etc., we always have 2 of our staff go out to that. And the same with our after hours provider, because it's important that they have the same measures as us.
So in summary, you're comfortable that the fees that are being set around animal control are appropriate for the level of service they're expected to deliver?
I am, yes, at this point with the information I have.
Okay. Thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Tribe, for the email sent to councillors last night. Councillors, we've got 4 recommendations. As Rhiannon pointed out, the 4th deals with the issue that we received submissions on during the annual plan process from the residents of Coopers Creek, and there's a delay there until discussions with residents are completed, and also noting that the schedule around animal control fees doesn't come into effect until this is formally adopted by council on the 28th of June. Is that correct? Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move those 4 recommendations as a block.
Okay. Councillor Lewis.
Before we put it to the vote, can I just ask, is there any correlation between the increased number of wandering dogs and unregistered dogs within the city?
Not a conclusion I could draw, sorry, councillor, at this point in time. I will look to my colleagues at the back and see. Could you repeat the question, please,
I was wondering if there is a correlation between the increased number of wandering dogs, which the pound has to pick up, and non-registered dogs. It seems, if there is, I wondered if there's, well, I won't make a comment on it, I just wondered if there's any correlation between the wandering dogs and unregistered dogs.
By the way, I'm John. I'm the team leader of Animal Services, so I came along to help out. I wouldn't say there was a direct correlation. I think that if we look at the overall numbers across the country, dog ownership numbers are actually decreasing. And if we look at our call-outs, they're actually decreasing at the same rate. So I think that the percentage of call-outs that we're getting are corresponding with that decrease in number of dogs around at the moment. Does that answer your question?
It does, John. I was trying to get it into my mind. The increased costs could be caused by some inconsiderate owners.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
There's a mixture of owners and neighbours, I guess. Councillor, I'm still looking for a seconder for the motion.
Oh, I'll second it.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Clark, and then I'll come to you.
Sure. Back to the dog fees being raised. It doesn't sit well with me, I guess, that we are in part raising it because we just haven't raised anything in the last 3 years. And my questions relate to two things. When I came into council, there was a $300,000 surplus sitting in animal services, and that was a targeted rate at that stage. Now, things may have changed since then, but the big is the question, well, where's the money gone? And why should dog owners be subsidising services elsewhere? So that's one issue, I guess. And the other issue is we get regular quarterly updates from the finance team about how each service is going. So I guess the question is, how's it been going in the last 12 months? Are we running a surplus or a deficit? And what was last year's end of year result?
I would need to get that information to you, Councillor. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Sure, and I understand that, but it's really important if we're going to, dogs are an important issue for people, and if we want to encourage people in these difficult times to register dogs, and keep them registered, pushing the fees up just because we haven't had a fee increase for some time, if we don't have increased costs that are pushing us beyond our budgets, would not sit well with me, I guess.
Just to point out that I did ask a question clarifying that the costs had gone up.
We do have cost increases to run our service when you take into account the fuel for our vehicles, the equipment that we have to purchase, and our staffing costs, and also our after-hours service provider costs.
And I don't have any problems with any or all of that. What I'm suggesting, though, is if we were running a surplus this year, projected surplus this year, or a projected surplus result for last year, then that undermines the extra cost. It allows us to absorb it without actually pushing the dog registration up. One of the things that we've discussed in the past is if you push it up, especially in a high period of pressure on families, we'll get more people defaulting, and that in itself creates work.
Patricia, were you able to give any indication around how the figures were tracking if it was towards a surplus?
I can't off the top of my head because it's embedded in a number of services, so we'd have to pull them apart to be able to look at dogs solely, along with the rest of the compliance activities.
Thank you. Your Worship. Sorry. I'll come back to you, Councillor Clark, okay?
Yes, I'd just like to raise the issue of Cooper's Creek. It's been a long journey. That was 3 terms ago for me. And I know it seems backward in this age of technology, but I find the human presence and when you've got problems often turns out to be the best way to solve it. And this issue was raised because they're increasing their rates by, I don't know, it's $1 zillion, trillion, and I think it's just good to have a human presence there. They did have a ranger there, and he's retired, and they've made a lot of submissions, but it's just whether you depend. I remember at primary school, we always had a caretaker on the block, on the school, and it kept vandalism. Maybe there are other social issues involved too, but in that school anyway, it kept vandalism down to a minimum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a reminder, we are delaying any decision until we've completed discussions with the residents of Coopers Creek. Sorry, Councillor Clark, I hadn't meant to cut you off, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Pottinger.
Just a clarification, I wasn't seeking to get the costs for dog registrations, just the general animal services area.
Yep. Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Just following on from Councillor Clark's mentioning about dog reserves. Now, going right back to about 2011, I think it was, those reserve funds that were accumulated under dogs were actually used to build the new facility, kennel facility down near the wastewater. Now, I'm looking through figures, I'm under the understanding that those reserves now are about in the $800,000 mark, and I'm just wondering why exactly with Councillor Clark, why you would be putting up fees. It depends. I mean, is it supposed to break neutral, the whole cost of running the doggy enterprise, or it just seems that, or what would we be using in the long run these reserve funds that can only be spent on dog things for? I mean, I just need a bit of a strategy there.
Sorry, I'm not sure where the $800,000 figure came from, Patricia.
I do believe the 800,000 figure came from a piece of information that was provided to Mr. Tribe, which councillors received. That is our estimate at what it was last year. We know there's a piece of missing information in that, and that is an allocation of cost towards the dogs activity, which the team are busy going to be doing within the next 12 months to ensure the correct costs have been allocated to those net debt accounts. It's overall, council is correct, got the correct net debt position, but that one particular account does not look correct.
And my question was, I guess, what are we going to use that money for? That is in the doggy bank account.
So through you, Mr. Chair, that's not the reserve figure that staff had to date. So until we confirm up what exactly that is, we would put forward, following that, there would need to be a review of what was necessary and that and what was needed to be funding the service. So at that stage, you could look at the fees and charges if that was appropriate to fund it from the reserves. But we need to carry through on this work first with Patricia before we go any further with deciding how to fund the service. So at the moment, our revenue and financing policy is that it's 93% of our funding needs to come from fees and charges and 7% from rates for our compliance services.
Councillor Clark.
Well, the information just given by my colleague is just absolutely eye-watering, even if it's anywhere near $300,000 or $500,000 that we've got in reserves. And I guess if we, as he quite rightly says, if we're not looking to extend the pound in any shape and form, why would we just not leave the dog licensing fees at the same level? And if we need further information on that, and I understand you may need that, why don't we just leave this dog registration issue on the table like we're doing with Cooper's Creek until we get better information?
Michael.
Through yourself, Chair, I'd like to remind Council there is a project that was in the long-term plan in relation to some remedial works down at the dog pound to comply with the requirements through the audit that was conducted. We're still completing the final stages of that, and most of the reserves that were in the fund at that time will need to be sorted as part of that reallocation. I'd say most of them will go towards the works that have already been conducted in relation to capital works, but there's also a few projects still outstanding in that piece of work, which we are working through over the course of the next year. So I'm hoping that remedial works will be completed in the next year.
So that's around the exercise yard and the likes?
That is correct.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. That's the answer I was seeking. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Crackett.
I'm actually leaning a bit towards Councillor Clark on this issue. Like, if we do have the surplus there, I would sooner like to see clarity around it rather than just hiking the cost on a perhaps, or that we know that there has been inflation. We can't quantify how much that's actually going to have an impact on it yet. Yeah, I would sooner see a similar recommendation, there's number 4 there, a request to delay the implementation of the dog registration fee until we have clarity around it.
Councillor Pottinger.
Well, as I said before, I'm quite happy with the answer that Michael has presented, because it now signifies a use for those dog reserves money, and they're not sitting there idly while we're putting up fees. If they are being used in CapEx and stuff like that, then I can accept that. That's what it's there for. We've used it in the past, and as long as we keep improving facilities, expanding, that is fine. It's when we don't have any idea what we're going to use them for, then that's when I worry.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you for all of that. We could actually create a hiatus for just 1 year and see what transpires with the costs that Mr. Day has been talking about.
Did you indicate you wanted to speak, Councillor Clark?
Well, I guess there's two things for me on that. I'd be quite happy if the rates just stay the same for the next 12 months while we sort out where we're spending the surplus. But as already been indicated by staff, we don't have any understanding of how much that CapEx work will be costing, and we don't have any idea of whether we ran a surplus last year or whether we're going to run a surplus this year. And if we're running a surplus in the last 2 years, why would we be pushing the rates up if we've already got a nice nest egg there to do the CapEx work at the site? Just doesn't make any sense to me.
Talking about rates, or are you talking about the fees?
Just why the fees to the dog owners would go up.
Thanks.
And I'm quite happy for to have that sit on the table, like the Coopers Creek one, so that staff can give us a greater degree of information.
Councillor Soper.
Well, Mr. Chair, if there is a feeling from any councillors to add a recommendation 5, as the mover of the motions, I invite someone to add something that we could perhaps discuss.
Councillor Clark.
Happy to do that. So to treat it very much like recommendation 4.
Michael, can you answer what the potential impact on the annual plan is likely to be from?
Yes, through yourself, Chair. The calculation in relation to those fees has, as my colleague at the top indicated, was based on the percentages in relation to the fees recovery of 93 to 7%. Any change in that would have an impact of altering that balance if those fees were not approved as they are proposed. So that would mean that the 7% that is currently rates paying would need to go up to compensate in relation to that, which would recalculate the 6.53. That is something I can't quite do on the fly at the moment, sorry council, but it would have an impact. It might be minor, but it would definitely have an impact on that 6.53. So I just want to bring your attention to that. And there has been a calculation, because it is the 93% that my colleague raised in relation to operating cost percentage that it's covering in relation to the fee increase.
Councillor Clark.
Just as a final comment on that, I wouldn't expect the wider community to pay for a reduction or a holding of dog fees. I think they need to be user pays, as was suggested by Trudy. But we don't have enough information, I don't think. And I'd be happy to hear what Michael's got to say and what some of the other staff have got to say as well, to have some numbers around this.
So you're suggesting around the delay until there's a clarification around
Sure.
numbers, is that your question?
That may not take long. A little bit like we're doing with the Coopers Creek one.
Just give the staff a moment. I think that might be useful. Look, councillors, I don't want to catch the staff without having had a chance to discuss this for just a couple of minutes. I'll take a brief 5-minute adjournment. Councillor Pottinger?
Oh, look, there was one, while we might as well, I'll throw another curveball in. Okay, during the risk and assurance meeting this morning, we talked about $106,000 of unclaimed or unrecovered dog registration fees. Now, if they weren't to be recovered, and had to be written off. Now, obviously, that's going to impact what Michael was talking about before as well.
Correct.
So, what stage do we, again, do we carry that as a revenue, and then all of a sudden it has to be written off?
Good point, and bearing in mind that that figure of unregistered dogs or dogs not being re-registered is going up.
That's
So
it.
I'll call it a 5-minute adjournment, councillors. We will be underway at 10:02. I don't want to come. We'll just fire up the stream once again. Okay, for those on the live stream, thank you for bearing with us. Councillor Abbott, you can turn your camera back on.
Hold on a moment, yes.
We'll reconvene. Who was taking the lead? Trudy.
Yes. Through you, Mr. Chair. So just to reconfirm to council or to the committee, we do have an obligation to advertise on Monday as part of the Dog Control Act. It's a legislative requirement that we advertise a change in fees. So we do need some form of decision today. It's roughly a 5% increase, and that does reflect the increased cost to the service to run the operation, from the staffing right through to the after hours, etc., etc. And we have understood to date that we had available approximately 160 to 180,000 in reserve to work on that additional capital works. But Patricia and her team will obviously be doing a deeper dive to analyse that, but there wasn't significantly more than that available.
And just to recap, portion of that reserve has been attributed to some CapEx.
Yes.
And it is also potentially being used to fund a shortfall in registration fees from people defaulting.
Potentially, yes.
Thank you. So, Councillor Clark, we were with you, and that you were seeking.
So, based on that advice, I'm still opposed to the increase in things, because it's all very well to say that our current charges have gone up 5%, but if I don't have a year-end result for last year for animal services, what happens if they made a 5% surplus last year? And we don't have that. And we don't have the projected outcomes for animal services for this year as well. So it wouldn't be right to me to be pushing the rate for dog registrations up 5%, only to find out at the end of the year that we've got another healthy surplus in there.
Bearing in mind that we're just a couple of weeks away from the end of the year as well.
Sure. But I'm sure that finance team can give us an indication of where we're at with that. It wouldn't be too hard. We get those traffic light reports anyway by service. So we get it for water services, we get it for animal services.
So I'm not getting a lead from you there, Nobby.
Well, I mean, I guess I've already said I would like that to be left on the table. If we can leave the Cooper's Creek stuff on the table, then I'm open to them coming back, the staff coming back with some information about what last year's figures were and what the current year's figures were, to safeguard that we're not pushing up rates just because we haven't had it for 3 years. But again, it's up to my colleagues to decide on that.
Mrs. Hadley, do you want to comment on that?
Mr. Chair, I'd just point out there's a difference between the situation with Cooper's Creek and the situation with dog control, insofar as the dog control is more legislatively required, set out. Trudy's referred to the need to send the notices out on Monday.
Councillor Arnold, then Councillor Pottinger, and then His Worship.
I'm sitting like this.
All right.
Like,
Well, you've got to,
the fingers are loaded. But,
you ever go to Todd's auction house?
Yeah.
Walked away with something that you didn't want?
You want to see the furniture I've got at home?
Yeah.
And the chickens.
Councillor Pottinger.
Look, in closing, we've had the explanation from Michael about the use of the reserves, and that's, I believe, has satisfied us to move on with the increased dog fees. If the reserves build up again, we can then improve our facilities again, and as long as we are doing that, reinvesting the money, then I'm happy that we're not sitting on stuff. So I've been convinced that we are using the money, and so I'm happy to move that this increase is justified, and hopefully this can stay like this for, say, another 3 years.
Well, we don't need a motion because there's already
Yeah,
one.
no, but I'm happy that it can stay like that, and
thank you.
In 3 years' time, look at it.
Your Worship.
Yes, I find there's quite a difference between Cooper's Creek and dog control, and because we're looking at how do we solve this problem in a long-term way. Otherwise, it's just going to keep coming back and coming out for council, reserves in council debate as it has been carrying on now, and we had this problem in Auckland. Sorry to harp on about it, but it's the main experience I've had of this issue. Is that we've got to solve it, and we've had this problem. We had a little settlement like that at Muriwai, a little settlement like that at Hobsonville, and they were built without a permit. They've got the right to live there, but not
Your
to
Worship,
build.
no one is questioning the delay over what's happening with Coopers Creek while we continue the discussions with the residents out there. That's not been challenged by any councillors so far. So there's no action being taken at this stage on the residents of Coopers Creek until there's been further discussion and more clarity.
Okay, I accept that.
Thank you. So let's see if I can bring this to a head. Councillor Clark, got the right C there, is suggesting a delay to the implementation to any changes in the dog registration fee. Is there a seconder for such a proposal? Okay. Seconded by Councillor Arnold. We've all had a reasonable bite at it, so I'll test that to see if there is any willingness for that to be added. And then it'll form part of the overall suite of recommendations if everybody's comfortable with that. Okay, those in support of adding that a delay to the implementation of any change to dog registration fees, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
No. I declare the motion lost. So we come back to the remaining four recommendations that have been moved and seconded. Are there any further questions or comments around that? If not, I'll put that motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against?
Yes, I'm opposed.
Would you like your vote recorded, Councillor?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And likewise, please.
And Councillor Arnold and Councillor Abbott. Thank you. That brings us to the annual plan solid waste additional funding updates. Welcome along, Peter. Patricia. Thanks for, first of all, getting the information together in a short time frame. I know that we sought some clarification following deliberations from the last extraordinary PPP around the annual plan. Peter.
I'll take the report as read. So if you refer to pages 270, 273, that's where the report is. Now, I think the questions around is why there's an increase in costs, and that's related to an increase in materials going to landfill, plus increases per tonne of those costs. So there's increases in the ETCS, there's increases in transport costs and transfer costs. There's increases in across the board in terms of the transfer station management. There's a cost in terms of increases in terms of the collection of the bins. So the bins are actually measured per bin collection, not per weight. So then we've got additional bins as the population rises. There's an increase of generally around about 5% that we're forecasting in terms of the tonnage recovery. There's been a slight drop in recycling, but there's no material difference in terms of the overall costs.
Thank you. Patricia, anything you'd like to add?
So I just want to clarify one point which was raised to me this morning, that in the paper which you received a fortnight ago at the extraordinary PPP meeting in relation to the recovery, potential recovery from Southland District Council. That amount had already been factored in to the rates increase at that point that staff were advising. So it was not if, it was if we were budgeting that we would recover that amount. So I think there was a use of the word if that was a little confusing.
Thank you. Councillor Pottinger.
Right.
Well, you asked the question in the first instance.
About the waste increase.
Yes.
Yes, I did, and obviously I was focusing on figures that I'd been given, and that's since been clarified. I mean, the staff report explains why we have the 1.17% increase. It's made up. You've got cost of doing business, and you've got an increase in waste we're producing per capita. Now, I can understand the cost of doing business going up. You've got levies, government taxes around the emission trading scheme. You've got the cost increases from contractors. I mean, diesel alone would explain a part of it. But what I can't come to grips with is the increase in weight per capita. And the reason for this is there's a piece of legislation, government legislation, called the Waste Minimization Act 2008. And what that does, it instructs councils through what's called a waste minimisation management plan that they have to adopt to address and minimise waste going to landfill. So on one hand, we are forecasting, quite rightly, because the figures show it, a 5% increase in waste that we're creating. Yet on the other hand, we're supposed to be reducing waste. Now, right, so who does this? Well, the Waste Minimisation Plan is done by a joint committee, which is WasteNet. Now, they created this new plan in June 2020, and that was the last time WasteNet ever met, the record show. That's 2 years ago. So during this hiatus, we have had no initiatives for waste minimisation. We've had no bin inspections. We've had no waste audits. And we've been racking up, as we see now in front of us, causing a $700,000, 1.17% rate increase. This is an accumulative result of basically doing nothing. In fact, if you read the forward of the Waste Minimisation Plan, and I wrote it down because it baffles me a wee bit, the plan adopts a holding pattern position, providing WasteNet with the opportunity to understand the overall direction of where the waste sector in New Zealand is heading and how we can best position ourselves to meet the challenge. Well, unfortunately, this is actually true in effect, because that's the last we heard of WasteNet. And 2 years of hiatus sees us reeling with these extra charges. Now, the other thing that baffles me as well is that in the gate levy at AB Lime, there's a $10 WasteNet administration fee. Now, this is applied to every tonne that goes in from Southland into AB Lime. Now, if we go back to that June 25 meeting, 2020, in the agenda, it lists the financials. And that fund on in 2019 was $609,000, that fund. Now, I've worked it out. It would now be around $1.2 million. So we've got that money sitting there in a fund in WasteNet that council is a major participant in. Now, I can't quite see. It's like the dog thing. We sorted that out. We had money in reserves and we've worked out it's being used, whatever. This money is not being used, along with there's also another levy the government charges, and that's $30 a tonne. Well, it used to be 20, and that's their levy on anything going to landfill. And what they do is that you apply for a rebate, and they give you half it back, which you're supposed to spend on initiatives to divert waste. That's what it's all about. We have not spent a cent of that, and I worked out there's 240,000 of that sitting there not being used. That can't offset rates, but it can help us. It can be used by staff to try and reverse these trends. The thing is that you might argue, or someone might argue, that we can't touch this $1.2 million. Well, back when I was in the old days, when I was on WasteNet, this particular fund was used to offset fluctuations in the ETS levy. So what would happen is it was going up and down and everywhere, and that money was applied. We currently spend 1.3 million a year on emission trading scheme levies. So I just would like to see us being able to get some of our money back out of that fund that is just not being used and is creeping up to a monumental amount. So there we go.
So can I come back to the, are you comfortable that the additional $700,000 of funding that was requested is required?
That is required, yes, that is justified. I don't like the way it's got there, and the fact that it's from not addressing our excessive waste, and our remedy is to use some of that $1.2 million.
Thank you. So there are 3 recommendations there as a result of the report that it's received, determine that the amount is required, and also the note that is item 3. I'm happy to move those 3 recommendations if this is seconded.
Second that.
Councillor Skell, thank you. It's open for discussion. Councillor Clark.
Yep, just want to add to what Rangi's just said. I mean, he's the expert in this field as far as I'm concerned. And I wonder whether the no bin inspections has had an impact as well, because a lot of stuff that we pay for is weight related. Certainly going to AB line it is, and so if we've got too many glass bottles for argument's sake in the wrong container, that's where the waste cost kicks in. So yeah, I think that there's several things that are driving up.
I think there's an occupational health and safety matter around the bin inspections that has been raised previously, and there's a resourcing issue as well. Just to answer that point. But any further questions or comments? Sorry, that was it you, Councillor?
Yeah, I know. Just a comment back. I mean, I've heard the chief executive previously say that it was a resourcing issue, hard to find people to do the work. Not heard of the health and safety things. You can get protective gloves and what have you to do it. I know it's not the most perfect job, but given that we're one of only a few councils that actually only runs 2 bins, where others run 3, the glass is an issue for us. If we get it in the right bin, we can isolate it. If we don't, it adds weight to the AB line, but costing, I suppose.
Thank you. Councillors, Councillor Pottinger?
I'm just looking at Steve. Did you want to speak, Steve, on something? No? Right. Look, I want to talk about the bin inspections. Now, I've found out that council was approached back in 2019 about subcontracting that out, having another service provider for bin inspections, and turned it down. Now, that would solve a lot of health and safety issues where you know, we have to take it on board. So, you know, these things need to be explored. I'm informed by the team that a report is coming to the next infrastructure meeting that will address quite a few of the issues I've raised today. So I have confidence in that. But what I want to do now is, I mean, I'd like to move, actually, that we do use some of that $1.2 million in the WasteNet fund.
That would be contrary to the motions that already sit on the table.
I'll move an amendment.
Sorry, I'm also advised it's potentially contrary to the WasteNet agreement. I understand what you're saying, and maybe that's an issue that you can raise when the report comes to infrastructural services.
We are setting the rates here, and we've been told it is compounding, so...
And you said you were satisfied with the answer?
I was satisfied with why the rates had, why the amount had been achieved.
Yep.
And now I'm offering a solution.
Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was just going to agree with what you had said, that since we now know there is a report on the holistic issue coming to infrastructure, it seems sensible to leave any further discussion to infrastructure in light of that report.
And I think it would be good to see perhaps some of the suggestions around what can be done to see some positive waste minimisation happening and enact some of the funds that have may or may not be, because we don't know, because we haven't seen them built up at that point. But at this stage, it was around the $700,000 that was additional funding that was being requested, and that's what forms part of this motion. So there are 3 recommendations that have been moved and seconded, and I'll test them by putting it to a vote. All in favour?
Aye.
Against?
I'm against, and the fact that I've just mentioned that we're not doing all practically possible to solve that.
So you'd like that recorded?
Yes, please.
And Councillor Arnold? Thank you.
And the same for me, Chair, as well.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Thank you, councillors. That brings us on to tab 18, which is council representation at the Lgnz AGM.
Good afternoon again, all councillors. It's a small report to bring home the public part of this meeting. As you will be aware, there is the Local Government New Zealand AGM coming up. Council is entitled to be represented and vote at the AGM on the various remits by a presiding delegate and then 3 alternate delegates. It has been recommended by the chairs group that they be comprised of the 2 committee chairs and the 2 deputy committee chairs, but this committee needs to determine who is the presiding delegate and then of course provide the 3 alternate delegates, and it is up to this committee to make that decision. I'm of course happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Morris?
I've got one big question there.
Councillor.
The fact that this was decided at a chairs meeting and not by the full council as to who will go and represent the council at this particular meeting, I think that's a little bit unfair, because what I see is like a small group making a decision for themselves, if you like, to actually do this. So you don't think it should be something that
I can say,
council?
Councillor, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I know the chairs group did not determine this. It is for, my reporters left it open for this committee to determine. What I was relaying was what the chairs group had recommended be the makeup of the delegates. This committee is free to decide who they would like to be the presiding member and who they would like to be the alternate delegates, and if it's not clear in my report that that is the case, then I apologise.
Thank you. It's also worth reiterating that it's a Zoom meeting, so it's not heading away anywhere. So we're looking for a presiding delegate and an alternate and a recommendation. There are
3 alternates.
Sorry?
3 alternates, I believe.
You can have up to 3. So your council's entitled to be represented by 4 people, the presiding delegate and up to 3 delegates, but you can determine to have 1 or 2.
Silence, random, we all got it. Councillor
I
Arnold.
was just going to say, it does say here, Mr. Chair, through you, that it's actually they will attend the local government, so it doesn't say anything about Zoom meetings here to me. It says that they will attend.
It's in the report.
The report does say the AGM is to be held by way of Zoom only.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Well, I think traditionally the mayor should be the presiding delegate, and
are coming up. As we did for last year, we will bring those remits to council for guidance on how the voting is to go.
My personal view is that, I mean, I don't need to be involved in this, but personal view is at least the 2 chairs should be involved as 2 of the 4. And then I think we should open the floor for anybody else that might want to be involved, and that includes the deputy chairs, but there may be other people that are interested as well.
Councillor Soper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we clarify who was the presiding delegate at the last
Me.
AGM?
Councillor Crackett was the alternate.
I was the alternate.
Thank you. Perhaps it would be straightforward if you asked Mr. Chair who was interested in being the presiding delegate and who was interested in being one of up to 3 alternate delegates, and that might narrow the field somewhat.
Fair enough. Is anybody interested in being the presiding delegate? Show of hands. I've put mine up, just in case you couldn't see Alex. Again, it's about representing the views that council is to put forward through a meeting we've yet to hold.
Do we nominate the same people who did it last year then?
We have no
Councillor
nominations
Ludlow?
as yet. I mean, we're open.
Yes, well, I was going to nominate that.
To put,
Fine.
to
Excuse
put
me,
something on
Chair.
the table.
What time of the day on that Thursday?
No.
We don't know.
Oh, you don't know, but it is the Thursday. Right.
Michael, do you know?
No, I don't have an exact time for when that's starting, unfortunately.
Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just to put something on the table, because it is late and it doesn't seem like it's something we need to spend a great deal of time on. Can I nominate Councillor Ludlow as the presiding delegate, and Councillors Amundsen, Crackett, and Pottinger as the alternate delegates?
I'm unavailable that day, so won't be able to attend.
That knocks it down.
Yeah, same. Unavailable on that Thursday.
Well, that narrows
Well,
it
that narrows it down
considerably
entirely.
to
In that
the
case, I nominate Councillor.
potentially the same representatives that you had last year.
You're the last people standing. I nominate Councillor Ludlow as presiding delegate, Councillor Crackett as alternate delegate.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Reverend Cook, thank you. Mrs. Hadley? No,
sorry.
Okay, it's a small item. Well, there's a recommendation that the report's received, and that's myself registered as council's presiding delegate and Councillor Crackett as alternate as per last year. Put that all in favour?
Aye.
Against?
No.
Would you like your vote recorded, Your Worship?
Yes.
Thank you. Carried.
Alex has raised her hand.
Oh, sorry, Alex. My apologies, I missed your hand there.
That's fine. I think it was just really important to clarify that I'm not sure if you had probably already, but I've just obviously had to zip out and get Charlie, and now I'm back again. That we, as a round table, will have the opportunity to feed in and discuss everything.
Yep, we had carried that out.
We have carried that out. Yeah, so it'll literally just be pushing a button.
Indeed.
Won't be a button this year.
Or well, it won't be a button this year. It will be raising your hand on Zoom, I assume. But yeah, and I also
look forward to
just
seeing
want
what it
add-
is, because it wasn't a successful Zoom AGM last time.
Seem to remember
Was
that.
anybody who wasn't part of the Cheers group, because I do take heed of what Councillor Arnold had put forward. Don't want it to ever feel like it is a closed group, and that it's not as part of the Cheers, and would really like to open the floor to anybody
Thanks,
else who
Councillor, but I'm
would
running
want
the
to
meeting.
attend. Well, yeah, no, I can't.
After going
but you
through
know
a
what I
prolonged
mean.
period of social awkwardness, we've had a motion and it's been passed.
Okay.
If there was somebody who was busting at the seams to go through online torture, they've lost that opportunity. Thank you.
That was the same as we had last time, and I think from memory I went to the conference anyway.
Yes, this is just an online meeting, sir.
Oh,
Yep. Although you weren't there for the AGM on the Sunday. Beg your pardon, Saturday morning, yes. That brings us to the activities report.
So it's after 5 o'clock. So in the interest of time, I'm very happy to take questions. The highlight for me is just to say that there's a general feeling of eagerness on the departments of wanting to get back to normal. So a lot of the focus now is about what it's going to take to get back to normal, to get back to what our service levels used to be, and reconnect with those people. So there's a lot of anticipation out there. We're not there yet, though. We are still very much reduced services across our facilities, but there is a bit of optimism out there. So happy to take questions.
Thanks, Richard. Councillor Pottinger.
I'm very wary of reports coming right at the end of a long meeting day. So, yeah.
I look forward to your activities report, which went through pretty quickly. Noted. Thanks for that. The recommendation is that the report is received. I'm guessing illness still plagues us in how we're able to deal with delivery sometimes, but we have, I think, coped admirably through the past 2 years, particularly when other councils have had to close their doors.
And through you, Mr. Chair, given the environment that we're in at the moment, the general feeling of community, we're in exactly where you'd expect us to be in terms of performance.
And if there are people who think that the whole pandemic's finished, I've got a wife who works in a high school who'll tell you otherwise. So I'll move that the report's received. Councillor Sabri, seconding it?
I'll second that, and I'll also just say compliments to the staff in various parts of our organisation who have been doing things like adding extra programs and thinking outside the square to keep activities going, keep them current and attract people to participate. That has been noticed and commented on during the COVID times.
Even had an entertainment event on Friday night at the Civic. How exciting. Another one tomorrow. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Whoops, we went to risk and assurance there. We've now got the in-committee portion of this evening's meeting. I'll move that we go into public excluded, receive the minutes of the PE session of the Community Wellbeing Fund, confirmation of minutes from the PE session of Performance Policy and Partnerships May 10, and the Great South Review of Governance Process. Reasons for going into public excluded are outlined on the paper. Put that. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. To those who've been following us on live stream, well done on getting this far. Thank you for your interests. We are now